Today, 17 years and about 335 days after terrorists declared war on the American homeland in the attacks of 9/11, we woke up to some language of the same language of war from some of our government officials. This time, the enemy is domestic terrorism, and according to FBI Director Chris Wray, it's largely fueled by white supremacy. In the wake of two mass shootings over the weekend in Texas and Ohio that together killed 31 people and wounded 45 more, there's an open question today about the role that the president's racist language may be playing in the uptick of violence, particularly as we learn more about the shooting in El Paso. It's language that targets elected officials of color, immigrants, asylum seekers, and even athletes. Language amplified daily on the president's Twitter feed, featured prominently at his MAGA rallies, and sometimes preceded by similar attacks from Fox News and other right-wing media. Phil Rucker of the Washington Post puts the finest point on questions surrounding the president's role, writing this, quote, after yet another mass slaying, the question surrounding the president is no longer whether he will respond as other presidents once did, but whether his words contributed to the carnage. Since the moment Trump rode down his gold-plated escalator 4 years ago to start his renegade run for the White House, us against them language about immigrants has been a consistent and defining feature of his campaign, and now of his presidency. Absent from his repertoire has been a forceful repudiation of the white nationalism, taking rise on his watch. And as with watching the CIA fight the Russian attack on our democracy, while Trump often seemed to row in the opposite direction, questions now about whether the FBI will fight white supremacy while the president encourages hatred. Congresswoman Escobar, whose district includes El Paso, spoke out about the president's role this morning.
Words have consequences, and the president has made my community and my people the enemy. He has told the country that we are people to be feared, people to be hated. He has done that at his rallies. He has done that through his Twitter. I heard earlier someone mention that he may be coming here. I hope that he has the self-awareness to understand that we are in pain and we are mourning and we are doing our very best in our typical beautiful, graceful El Paso way to continue to be resilient.
The president made remarks this morning, 50 hours after the first shots rang out in El Paso at a Walmart. But nothing he said today erased his lengthy and ongoing screed against Americans of color and immigrants.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists.
You know what they are? They're thugs. Yeah, build that wall. You're right.
I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides.
You know what? We're not letting these people invade our country. If you look at the border and you look at the hundreds of thousands of people that are invading, or at least trying to invade our country.
It is an invasion. You know that. I say invasion. They say, isn't that terrible?
I don't care what the fake media says. That's an invasion of our country.
But how do you stop these people? You can't. There's no... That's only in the panhandle you can get away with that statement.
So it was according to two sources. Members of the crowd yelled, "Shoot them." The president's response, only in the panhandle. That is where we start today. With us at the table, Eddie Glaude, chair of the Center for African American Studies at Princeton University, politics editor for the Daily Beast. Sam Stein is back. Paul Reyes, a columnist for USA Today. Raul Reyes, a columnist for... So should we confess that I asked, that we practiced and I still got it wrong? Raul, that's why we're laughing. Raul Reyes, a columnist for USA Today, who's from El Paso, was there this weekend, joins us. Plus, former Republican Congressman, now an independent, David Jolly, former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi, is here. And with us today, the piece we quoted, White House Bureau Chief for the Washington Post, Phil Rucker. Phil Rucker, I'll out myself. I emailed you last night and said I thought that your reporting on this weekend and on this president was some of the most reporting at one of the most distressing points in Trump's presidency, and I want to read a little bit more of what you wrote, because this gets to the heart of the matter, the overlap between the killer in El Paso's manifesto and Donald Trump's language. Here's what you write about that. Portions of the 2,300-word essay titled "The Inconvenient Truth" closely mirror Trump's rhetoric, as well as the language of the white nationalist movement, including a warning about the Hispanic invasion of Texas, in quotes. The author's ideology is so aligned with the president's that he decided to conclude his manifesto by clarifying that his views predate Trump's 2016 campaign and arguing that blaming him would amount to fake news, another Trump phase. So the killer, so aligned with Trump that he's more Trump than Trump?
Well, it's chilling, Nicolle, and reading that manifesto, you see so many parallels to the kind of message that President Trump has delivered from the Oval Office, from the presidential podium at his rallies, from his Twitter, which are official presidential statements. And what we saw today at the White House from the president when he gave that scripted speech at 10 a.m. was almost a repudiation of everything we've heard previously from Trump. I mean, there are two different Trumps on display here, the presidential scripted Trump and the id, the Trump who bashes immigrants and talks about them as subhuman and talks about this invasion. And so the president's going to have to grapple with his rhetoric and his words and the extent to which that language has contributed to the tensions and divisions in this country and perhaps the very carnage we saw in Texas.
The words that I can hardly believe as they come out of Phil Rucker's mouth, Frank Figliuzzi, but you predicted this. You so much as predicted that the tinderbox that Phil and Peter Baker at the New York Times have written about, this country's sort of state of play when it comes to questions of race, so amped up by the president's rhetoric, colliding with this rise in white supremacy and domestic terrorism. Talk about what you predicted, what you feared, and what has come to pass.
Well, I've never felt so badly about being right before. I wish I were wrong, but I had to put pen to paper because it was instinctive. This isn't rocket science. If you've been in the intelligence community, you have an instinct to identify a threat and then push it out, get the intel and the prediction out. And what I saw happening was the theme of the president attacking the so-called squad, the elected Congress members of color, telling them to go back where they came from, and the attack on Elijah Cummings in the city of Baltimore, where no human, quote, would want to live. I saw that resonating among the white hate groups, the white supremacist movement, and I saw them being encouraged and emboldened by it. And that kind of was a trigger that I saw developing that I needed to talk about. So what I see is uncanny parallels between the radicalization you see in Islamic violent extremism, radicalization to commit jihad, to go to jihad, and then what we're seeing in the white hate movement. It is radicalization. And so how do you stop it? We're talking about health care. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about guns. And yes, we need to talk about all of that. But one way to stop it is for that driving radicalizer, that on the Islamic side, that Muslim cleric that's playing the beheading videos and radicalizing you, that guy has to come out and say, I renounce this. I reject it. I was wrong. I don't need you anymore. Stop it. It's not American. And we didn't hear that today. This press conference today by the president, to use a baseball phrase, was a swing and a miss. He spoke in collective language and passive voice, not in first person. He didn't say, I renounce and reject it. He said, he instructed us to reject it. The nation must condemn racism. Well, guess what? We condemn it already. But how about you? You are the radicalizer in chief. We didn't hear that today.
Well, let me just, and we're going to spend some more time on this later in the show, but Frank, let me just stay with you on this, because I think the parallel is so haunting. I was in the White House on 9/11. I know everything we did, and those policies and those choices and those decisions will be debated till the end of time. But after 9/11, with an attack on the homeland, the questions were not whether or not we'd be attacked again. It was where and when. And the policy was, you know, and again, we can debate which ones were right and which ones ones were wrong. But the conduct of the U.S. government was from the top to the bottom to come together and make policies to prevent the attack. What you're saying is that the person at the top of the federal government didn't even say, I condemn the terrorist conduct.
I'm saying he didn't go far enough. He tried, he swung, he didn't make contact with the ball, and as a result of that, amongst our society who don't make the subtle distinction between a license to hate and then a license to murder. They don't see that distinction. I hear people saying, well, the president didn't directly call for violence. He's not responsible for El Paso. The subtle distinction between a call to act and a call to hate is lost on people who are of the extremist ideology, seeking to belong to something bigger than themselves, and they've found it. And the only way to stop that and disrupt the radicalization process is to call it out and stop them. He didn't do it. So I fear that they're going to interpret his press conference today and that subtle but important difference between I reject and we must reject. They're going to say that was the lip service that he had to pay to us. His scriptwriter made him say that. He doesn't really mean it. And that's not disrupting the radicalization.
Frank, I was reminded about the power of speech by a former senior intelligence official who said, remember the lengths we went to after 9/11 to find the perpetrators, the purveyors of terrorist speech. We did things that will forever alienate people from the Bush presidency, like looking for phone records, wiretapping. We were so hungry for the speech. Now the speech is on a Twitter feed. It's on radio stations. It's on the internet. What do you do when the speech is everywhere? You don't even have to look for it.
Well, first, we need a whole-of-government approach, as you said, like we had after 9/11. We literally changed laws. We created an entire government agency called the Department of Homeland Security. We created an executive called the Director of National Intelligence. We all pulled together and changed our government to combat the threat. And now what are we hearing? We're hearing from the FBI that the new threat, by far, the number of cases, the number of arrests, is all about white terrorism and white hate, yet all we're hearing is it's some kind of mental health problem. So we're not seeing the all-of-government response that's necessary to get this job done.
So that's the threat. Raul, let's talk about the targets. The targets were moms and dads in communities of color buying pencils and backpacks and notebooks for their kids for back-to-school shopping.
Yeah, and you know, I was, as you mentioned, I was there in El Paso for a family reunion. And before any of these details came out, one thing that I knew and I heard from so many other people was that this shooter was not from El Paso. And as it turned out, that was true because El Paso is a very warm, friendly, and very safe place. And in fact, you know, I knew it was targeted because this mall is a place everyone in El Paso has been there a million times. And with regard to the president's remarks, sad to say, I don't really see at this point anything he can do. In words and actions throughout his presidency, he's basically declared open season on Latinos because we are one of his favorite targets. And it's not just the language he used. You know, you mentioned calling Mexicans drug dealers and rapists when he came down the escalator. That was day one. Then it escalated into attacks on Latino journalists. It escalated into attacks on the so-called, as in his words, the Mexican judge. Then he ramped it up again to the invasion, the warning people of the caravan, and words like infestation. What do you do with an infestation? With an infestation, the conclusion is to attempt an extermination. So to me, there's very little distinction between his inciting this violence and the fact that it is now happening, because sad to say, it's probably inevitable. He knows what he's doing. This resonates with a portion of his base, and he has succeeded, unfortunately, in turning virtually the entire conversation about Latinos in the United States to hinge on illegal immigration, undocumented people, and this purported threat that Latinos pose to this country. We never hear in this country, very rarely, about Latinos in education, Latino views on health care, climate change. It is solely around immigration, and that's due in large part to him. And in that sense, very tragically, he has succeeded.
What do you do when certainly the last Republican president fought for, sought, and it's not ideal, but had 44% of Latino vote. It was so politically powerful inside the last Republican administration. President Obama used the power of the presidency to try to pass comprehensive immigration reform with the Latino community, Latino leaders at the table. You now have a president, as you said, talking about exterminating Latinos.
It's not even, to me, it's not even a question of what this president could do. And it brings me no pleasure saying this. I just think with this administration, it is too late. And this goes, to me, it's not even a political question, because Obama, George W. Bush, H.W., all of the presidents in modern history have made sincere outreach to Latinos, whether or not their views happen to align with mainstream Latinos. They wanted them in their party. They wanted their support. This president beats beyond like the slightest minimum modicum of respect. Really, virtually has no regard for our communities. And we see the way he's treated some of the most prominent people, some of the Latino achievers in this nation. So when I watch his speech and I hear these words, they strike me as utterly insincere, completely inauthentic. If you paid 5 minutes worth of attention to Trump over the last few years, that's not who he is. That's just a disembodied person, as you stated, reading words off a teleprompter, totally passive voice.
So the three people that have spoken, you were the third person to say that those words are disconnected from anything he believes in, which is why, as Eddie and Sam knows, regulars of this program, we did not air them. You were here the day the attacks on the squad were ongoing that week, and we played President Obama singing Amazing Grace. I think we've got that video again. I mean, it's also worth, just for a minute, talking about how far from normal we are, because I think some of feeling so disoriented by this conversation, and actually, even as I asked you the question about the language of extermination, in my head I couldn't remember if that was something he said about Baltimore or something that was said by a surrogate and something he said about the Latino community. But I guess it's on us to be specific. But the climate where you even have to sort of pull down the files of insults that he's used for different minority groups is so overwhelming at this point. And I guess I take your point. The questions have all been answered. What now?
It's a very difficult question, Nicolle. I mean, you know, America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them and the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, yo, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, that 2-year-old had his bones broken by two parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicolle, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
What else?
Lord help us. See?
I can't follow that.
Please.
But first of all, that was beautifully said. But I want to just supplement that a tiny bit, because you're spot on. I'm not, I've thought a lot about this one story in the wake of this. It's a story that takes place in 2009. It's a political story. It's not a racial or cultural one, and it involves one of the earlier controversies of the Obama administration. It says a lot to me about where we are now, which is back then, the Department of Homeland Security under Janet Napolitano put out a study. The study said, warning, there's a rise in right-wing extremism and white nationalism. Now, the study was relatively non-controversial. If you looked at it, there was data-driven and whatnot. What was interesting, though, was what happened in the aftermath, which was a huge uproar among Republicans, accusations of bias within the DHS, and most importantly for this conversation, the Obama administration backed down. They apologized. And the reason I think this is an important data point in this story is that we do not structurally have the institutions or the willpower to confront these things. If we back down in face of backlash when the data's on our side, we're not going to be able to deal with this stuff. If we have a Congress that has to depend on one person in the Senate to bring legislation to the floor in order to get gun control legislation passed, we do not have the structures to handle these types of issues. Now, that might not be, our complete history, maybe down the road that we can get through this. But to Eddie's point, we look at this and we say, wow, Donald Trump, he has spurred a lot of this hatred, and true, he has. He's the Pied Piper of this stuff. Exactly. But this predates him. It's the inability to stand up for your own study at DHS that predates Donald Trump. It's the rise of the Tea Party not calling out what it really was that predates Donald Trump. It's welcoming birtherism when Trump was just part of it that predates Donald Trump. So, Eddie's absolutely right, and I think we need to have some hard conversations about whether our political system is up for the challenges.
But I think it's not just about our political systems, and I agree with what both of you are saying, but to me this transcends, ideology or politics, because this is about fundamental decency of respecting other human beings in this nation. And whether we're talking about Ronald Reagan or President Obama, no president in modern history has treated Latinos and other people of color like this president, with not even a modicum of aspiration to include them and bring them in. So, and one of the things that is very worrisome to me right now, just in terms of where we are as a country, Latinos are the largest minority group in this country. In October, around the time when Trump was hyping up the national emergency and the supposed threat of these caravans, back in October, Pew did a survey and found that 54% of Latinos felt very uneasy and felt that it was becoming more difficult just to exist as a Latino in the United States. That was nearly a year ago. A majority of Latinos say they are very pessimistic about this country's future. And when you go back and look at all the surveys that Pew has done over the years, Latinos have always, no matter whether the economic times were well or poorly, Latinos have always been very aspirational, optimistic. It is only right now things have drastically changed in this community. And that is dangerous for us as a nation when that's the state of affairs for the largest minority group.
Let me just bring Phil Rucker back in. Phil, I just want to come back to some of your paper has an extraordinary body of reporting from Friday as both shootings unfolded over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and almost like the background music, and I was updating on my phone, reading all of your paper's coverage. No Donald Trump. No Donald Trump. Hour 24, no Donald Trump. Around hour 36, some pictures showed up of Donald Trump on Instagram at a wedding at his, hotel or his house. His golf club, whatever it's called. I don't golf. What was he doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nicolle. He went on Friday afternoon to Bedminster, New Jersey, to his golf club, and he stayed secluded there for the next 48 hours. So as the shooting took place in El Paso, according to photos that circulated on Instagram, he was having dinner on the patio at the golf club. He paid a visit to a wedding, a bride and groom he presumably did not know, but they were having their wedding on the property at Bedminster. He posed for pictures with the bridal party. He was apparently golfing because he was also spotted hanging out in his golf clothes of khakis and a short sleeve T-shirt, smiling, signing autographs on caps, all the while saying nothing on camera to the American people. But what was so interesting about the weekend is there actually wasn't a call for him to be presidential and appear on camera and act as the consoler-in-chief, in part because in so many of these tragedies before, when he's done so, it's not been terribly effective. He has always struggled to convey empathy and emotion and to connect with victims and to really channel the grievances, the grieving of these communities. And so this time he stayed quiet until this morning at the White House.
Phil Rucker, your piece today is remarkable.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.